Bridging from the video from last time and the idea behind trying a relationship and then figuring out that it doesn't work, I want to kind of talk a little bit about divorce and the process that it kind of involves, and why sometimes breakups are a difficult transition, and sometimes estrangement, or like kind of like a separation before the kind of formal decision is made, is sometimes a good idea. So, from what I understand from the Quran and a little bit about uh, what I know from some of the stories that I've heard, is that uh, divorce can happen over three stages. So, I don't know, I haven't studied this formally in any way, so I'm not, and I don't necessarily know that there's any particular correct way anymore, given that we're in a postmodern world and people are trying to integrate and create eclectic ideas of understanding. I'm just going to go with what kind of comes to me, and then hopefully it'll kind of give everybody sort of like some kind of foundation as to what the process often can involve. Typically, whenever there's any kind of discontent, sometimes people suggest um, to factor in hormones, because we know that for women, because she has that kind of period where she goes through her menstruation, where her body's changing, um, the process of uh, almost shedding the inner lining creates a lot of cramps, as we know. Sometimes mood swings, sometimes people get migraines, sometimes people can't actually go to work because their thighs are like in pain. So there's this debilitating pain in like your legs or your back. So imagine a woman who's going through that period, and sometimes for some women it can last for 10 days. That period, those that painful period, can just sometimes be like the beginning first few days, sometimes 2 days, sometimes three. So imagine a woman who has that. She goes through that every month, and she has a family, and she has kids, and maybe she goes to work, and on top of all that, she has a husband who maybe doesn't necessarily understand the difference between um, uh, almost creating a boundary between how do I know when to delay, well, like for example, my personal wants are as a man, and then to almost try to be empathetic to what you are going through as a woman. So I don't know what the pain thresholds are for men and women. I'm pretty sure they're different, but to try to communicate that to a man from a woman's perspective while she's in pain, like while she's menstruating, is probably impossible, because it's probably just going to be a fight. Like it's just going to be impatience, like, you don't know what I'm going through, and he's like, I'm just asking for a simple thing. And oftentimes when men and women fight, it's never actually about the actual problem and solving it. It's usually about emotions, and they'll just bring up past grievances, and then they'll just attack each other, and then nothing gets resolved, and then they almost like just slam doors, get out of each other's way, and then just go to bed angry. So this I learned from movies, but also learned from understanding my own almost ups and downs with what my hormones go through whenever I'm going through these painful bouts of like menstrual cramps, or sometimes I have really bad back pain. So I have a very short fuse when I'm in pain. So I can only imagine if somebody is almost uh, creating a frustrating living environment on top of all that, it's probably like it's like the perfect storm. Like it's probably not going to be a very good idea to try to get involved into any kind of problem solving idea. So it's almost like, because at the prophet's time they're primitive almost, and they're starting to try to build a civilization, and the best way to kind of get involved with each other and communicate, and also understand each other's role as like men and women, and have each other heard and respected, and everyone's rights almost kind of preserved, they were trying to understand how to maneuver this. So it became a three step process for divorce. So it was almost like, if a man just says to a woman, "You're divorced," that's it. There doesn't have to actually be any kind of legal work. And so then she can maybe decide to go and live back with her family or her parents, and then he's on his own. And then they can think about, maybe after a little bit of time, they can decide, you know what, maybe we can try again. And maybe they'll decide, maybe we'll continue living apart, but we'll try to solve the problem with like other people. So sometimes that's a good idea, because if you have a fresh perspective from somebody else, that can almost kind of help you see something that you might not have seen. So if somebody says, "Oh, you know what? It's probably because they were having a very hard time at work, and they wanted to almost help you understand that maybe he was going to be losing his job, and it was very stressful for him. Like, if I lose my job and you want some time off of work, what are we going to do about like our living situation, for example? So that's very stressful for a man. It's very stressful for a woman, or for a family. And to not be able to talk about that and in a safe way where you feel like you won't be judged or threatened is, you can't predict what that's going to be like, right? Because sometimes people feel judged around the kind of job that they have, or the lifestyle that they have, and and especially if there's other family involved outside of that couple, it just exacerbates things. It just makes things even that more complicated. So sometimes people will decide, yeah, we'll work on things, and maybe we'll decide we'll try to get back together and live together and see how that goes. Now, when I was at Guelph, I had taken this life class, and it was kind of like an introductory course to my degree as like a child youth and family major, and it kind of just gave like a broad overview of everything you can kind of come across in life. It was a really nice comprehensive idea of thinking about adult life, or like an entry into adult life from someone who's like going into university from high school. So one of the things I remember was, even though actually at the time when I went to university the second time, I think I was 20, I might have been, I think like 23 or 24. So I was a little bit older than like the rest of the kids in my class. But one of the things I remember one of the professors saying, she was saying that she was a counselor, a couples and family therapy counselor. And she said, if you're ever in a fight with someone, like in a couple, as a couple, so someone that you love, and you're in a some kind of disagreement, and you want to have somebody help you solve the problem. So you want to almost involve somebody, like, I want to complain to you, but I also need some kind of advice or some kind of new perspective. She said, make sure that you find somebody to talk to that's going to try to help stitch you back together rather than pull you apart. Because it's almost like if you're already on like uncertain ground, and then somebody decides, "Ooh, I get to ruin someone's life," and they don't even try to help you. That's not really a friend, right? And it's definitely not somebody you want to try to get help from. Who knows why they're still in your life, or why they feel like they need to be in your life anymore. Sometimes life is just full of struggles, and for one reason or another, they're in your path for them to learn from you, or for them to learn, or for you to learn from them. But that's besides the point. The idea is that the more you understand, again, diversity and how to understand different people, you'll realize how to read people, which is, how do I understand what your outlook in life is, and do you have good intentions for other people or not? And if you can read people in that way, you'll understand which people you want to have in your life. Because if somebody talks bad about someone else to you, then they're probably going to do that about a lot of people, right? Which is called gossip. And it's not very nice to do that, because it takes away trust, right? So if I know, for example, that I have a friend whose name is Nancy, and I go to work with her, and she tells me like stories about her kids, her family, and she, for example, loves to, she has like a lot of different hobbies, and she loves to share her hobbies with me. These are fun topics to talk about, right? Because it's like sometimes you talk about all the struggles that you're going through as a mom, some of the things that your kids are going through. It's not really backbiting or gossiping. It's just like I'm telling a little bit about my life. And sometimes I'll just share with her, like, oh my gosh, these are really cool stories. I remember when I was a kid, I never got to do that. It's nice that you're doing that with your kids. That's just normal conversation. Now, if I have another friend named Brenda, for example, and every time we are together, all she does is talk bad about Nancy. Like, I don't even know why, for one thing, but I don't even see these bad things in Nancy. So I'm just like, I don't know why you would do that, for one thing. But anyway, I don't necessarily stand up for Nancy, other than to say, you know what, I don't know why you would think that. I've never really seen her do any of this, or I never thought I would hear that about her. But now I should probably be careful. Like, I think, like, I wonder what Brenda says about me when I'm not here, right? And then you might even think, like, is she trying to just create a problem between me and Nancy? Like, is she like, why are we having this kind of conversation to begin with, like me and Brenda? So when understanding these kind of patterns between different people, you'll understand how to read people. So in that case, when I say read people, it means you don't want to judge them exactly, but you'll just wonder, like, how would I want to tell you a secret, like Brenda? Like, if I tell you something that's deep about me or meaningful, how do I trust that you're not going to gossip about me behind my back, or maybe change the story and make it worse, and then like lie about me or something like that? we don't know why these people exist in the world, other than that we have to be diverse, and some people are making efforts about how to understand the universe and each other and themselves, and they have to do that process of learning by themselves. And maybe eventually they'll learn that this kind of behavior is, it makes it very difficult to have a true friend. So anyway, back to the story about this couple who are divorced. Let's, for example, say they find a friend who really wants them to try again with their relationship. So she'll say maybe, you know what, like, I know I've had these troubles in my relationship too, and it's actually very normal for couples to have these rough patches, they call them. So they'll say sometimes after you've been married for 4 years, there's like these statistics that are out, like you can read about on the internet, that say typically couples, when they have kids, because they're busy with kids, and then they almost lose sight of the goals that they had at the beginning of their marriage, and they're just really busy that they don't really get to spend time with each other, and then they almost forget why they love each other. So do you want to try that again? And they might be like, oh yeah, and it kind of brings back memories of when they were young, like old, like younger, and like maybe the goals that they would have had when they get older. So she's probably thinking, yeah, by now I probably would have thought this, and maybe we'll try again. So they go back together and they try again, and maybe things get better for a little bit, but they almost remember the goals that they were working towards without really trying to solve the problems that they had. So as long as they're not focusing on the problems and solving them, they might be okay. But now those problems didn't go away. They're just waiting there. And usually if you don't solve them or try to solve them when you're in a good mood, and you always only bring them up when you're in a bad mood, it only makes things worse. So that's usually when people decide, you know what, maybe these problems are not going to be solvable between us. And then they decide to divorce again. Now they only have one more chance to divorce. And God says that this is a way of saying that when you put a limit on it like that, it's almost a way of God saying, you're either going to have to make a serious effort, because sometimes if there's kids involved, it's not fair for them to always have to worry about, like, I have to always see my parents upset. I sometimes have to wonder as a kid, like, do I have to help in some way? It's not my responsibility really, but sometimes I feel like I should help. Or sometimes I wonder, like, is it my fault that they're fighting? It's never usually the kids' fault. It's always the parents that have to work on a problem. But that doesn't mean that the kids don't feel sad anyway, right? Because these are their parents and they love them and they want to see everybody getting along. But the reality is that doesn't always happen. So that's why God says it's a very serious thing. Like, you have to be careful of other people's emotions, not just yourself. So let's say they get divorced and they're like, nope, you know what? This is the last time. And then they take the kids with them. And now let's say, for example, it's the dad and he's just at home and he's like feeling sad. And he's like, I'm going to have to figure out how to do this on my own. Maybe I'll just see the kids on the weekend and that's going to be okay. I'm going to have to figure it out. And then as he's starting to figure it out, the kids come to him and maybe ask, like, why are you and mom not getting along? And he'll talk about it with them and maybe try to help them make sense of it. And hopefully parents are able to understand and help the kids understand that this isn't your fault. Like, sometimes mom and I just don't get along and we have a hard time talking about it. And even though we're trying, sometimes adults have these troubles, and it's best just to live separately and move on. And maybe that'll help you guys understand why not all relationships work, but parents will always love their kids. So then the kids will be like, okay, and then they're getting used to it and they start to kind of move on. And then the parents decide, okay, let's give it one more try. Now, in this case, the kids might not know how to feel because they're starting to get used to the fact that, okay, we're going to get used to a new normal, which is mom lives by herself, dad lives by himself, and sometimes we spend time with mom, sometimes we spend time with dad. Now, for them to try again is like, they might be happy, but then they might be thinking, is this going to keep happening? And that's probably why God said that there should only be 3 tries, and then after that, that's it. That woman is going to be like your mother for the man. So it means, like, you're not allowed to marry your mother, obviously. But that's God saying that things are going to change that much that she's going to either be like your sister or your mom, which means after that 3rd time, you're never going to be allowed to get married again. So you have to almost wonder, like, why does God help us understand the soul in that way? Like, it almost helps us understand why sometimes when we're sleeping, the spirit moves like that. It's almost to say we should take life very seriously, and especially relationships in people's hearts, because like I said, one time that one choice is made that isn't taken very seriously, but we're warned that you have to be careful, God actually makes it a very big responsibility for that person that made the choice, because it affects a lot of people. And if you think, let's for example say that couple has 4 kids, right? And those 4 kids are now thinking about, is this how all relationships are? So they're already building, like, maybe all relationships are troubling like that, and they don't know how to understand them. And it's true, a lot of, like, if you watch movies and read books, a lot of couples and relationships are very difficult to maintain, which means to keep kind of taking care of and making sure that the love is still there and that they're problem solving and communicating in a healthy way. So in that way, it's almost like giving them a realistic approach as to, like, when you try to understand relationships, understand that it is a lot of work, so that you don't take it like lightly, and you try to be serious with how you understand your emotions and how you try to understand other people's emotions. So it can actually also help you understand how to improve. Like, so sometimes when you see how other people's relationships are, you can almost think, oh, I like how they talk with each other. That's something I would want to do in my relationship. And if you see people who are arguing, you can say, I like that they aren't afraid to have different opinions. I would like that in my relationship. And I hope that I would know how to solve the problem without staying mad. Right? So learning and actually telling your mind that is very good, because it's actually, you're consciously learning and teaching your brain at the same time, so that your mind is remembering these things. And then if you end up watching a movie or anything like that, then if you actually see that happening, then you understand why um, people work so hard to try to maintain relationships and spend a lot of time getting to know each other before they decide to get married, if they do get married. Now, I want to try to help you understand about um, relationships that end up having blended families. So let's pretend, for example, I'm divorced and I have my kids, but they want to spend time with their dad, right? A lot of kids, that happens, or they want to spend the time with the mom. So now the other adult parent is on their own, and maybe they find somebody else that they want to spend time with. That can actually cause a lot of problems, because one of the parents might feel like, should I now find somebody else to get to know? And then they start to use the kids and say, tell me what happens when you go to dad's, or tell me what happens when you go to mom's. And now it's a trust thing, because you don't want to be caught in the middle, like tattling all the time or gossiping or spitting ideas like that. So these are one of the things where you have to learn to be assertive. Like, I talked about this a little bit about children learning how to be independent and build boundaries and almost decide for themselves how to think outside of what adults expect of them. So, for example, if they say, you know what, when you go to your dad's house, I want you to do this and tell me this, you can find a way to respectfully say, you know what, I'm sorry that you are feeling sad about how our life is changing, but I don't think that's very kind, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. And that's it. You can just say, I don't like gossiping. And then, same thing, if dad says, you know, when you go to your mom's house, I want you to, and then they ask you all these things, you can say, you know what, dad, I love you, and I love that you're asking to take care of like everybody else on the other side of the family, but I don't feel comfortable gossiping. And in that way, as adults, they're learning that if they have a question, they have to talk to each other as adults. It's not the kids' responsibility to be like a little train going back and forth and telling news. So these are things that are important to learn, because you, as a child, as you're growing into an adult, when you go into workplaces and you become somebody who's an adult who has your own job or starts your own business, you're going to have to deal with these problems as they are. Because sometimes people at work, they have these problems at home and they want to find somebody at work to talk to. And sometimes, if you are the boss or the manager or just somebody who's working, you want to be able to know how to talk to somebody and let them listen to them, talk about whatever it is that their concern is, and then also know when to have a boundary and say, "You sound like you're having a really difficult time at work. Would you like some time off?" So now you're being compassionate and you're being charitable, because sometimes you listening to a lot of other people's concerns invites other people to want to hear about it. Like, oh my God, what did that person do? What's happening in their life? And then they want to gossip again. That's just the way we are as humankind. Sometimes it's to learn about others, like, and maybe see if we can help. But not a lot of people are often wanting to learn about other people's lives to help. Sometimes it's just because they love the juicy gossip, they call it. Like, they just love to learn about what's going on in other people's lives. And that's typically very private, because having a family is a very difficult job. It's not easy. And we have to understand that there are boundaries and there are ways to respect each other's lives without making them feel like you're not normal or you don't know how to do it right. Everybody has a way of understanding how to have a family and what the rules are that they're trying to kind of evolve into and out of from their past. And especially if you have two families that are always involved in the couple's lives. So sometimes outside families, they don't mind and they give their kids a chance to kind of live their life on their own. But if there are families that everybody's always involved and trying to what's going on and do it this way, do it this way. It makes it very difficult. And it actually sometimes makes it very hard to have a relationship or a marriage. So I'm going to leave it at that. Try to pay attention to these when you watch movies or you watch television shows, and just kind of notice how adult relationships work, because sometimes that'll help you understand. I mean, if I'm a kid who's growing up, what kind of adult would I want to be, and what kind of relationship would I want to have, and how would I want to have healthy communication between myself and the other adult I'm trying to get to know.